Hey everybody, welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, Assistant Professor of Communication and Media at Lund University. You can follow the show on X at SMNP Podcast or visit us on the web at socialmediaandpolitics.org. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in to the 8th annual Social Media and Politics Year in Review. And as is customary, my guest is Dr. Anamaria Dutceac, Associate Professor in Strategic Communication at Lund University and Vice Dean of Research at the Faculty of Humanities and Theology at Lund University.
That's right. I have a very long title.
Welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Always happy to be here for this event.
Yes, it is an event by now. And for those who may be new to the podcast, the Year in Review is a recap of what's happened in the past year, and also a chance to have a little bit of a different format than the classic back and forth interview, and more of an open reflection, usually over a couple drinks. But last year and the year before, we were getting into the 3-hour mark. So this year, we're going to keep it a bit shorter by only giving 2 gifts each. So we'll aim for about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Max.
We always say that at the beginning, but this time we are going to keep it.
And I do have an early flight tomorrow morning, so I will not be having so many beers, which gets me to ramble.
There's a hard deadline.
Indeed. So without further ado, should we hop right into it?
Yes, I think as usual, you should open with your first gift. And if that's also according to the tradition, it would be something about the platform's own year in review.
Of course, it is a summary of the platform stats. And as we were discussing a little bit off the air, this must be the only resource in the world that actually tracks down these reports and synthesizes them into something that hopefully is interpretable. So the platforms themselves tend to release these year in review statistics, reports. They've varied over the years. I mean, this is the 8th year we do this. And,
I do remember last year there was not much.
No.
Definitely not so much connected to politics. There was some pop-related or popular culture, I should say, or maybe advertising, but not so much about politics.
No, and that is also the case this year, but there are just more and more platforms. And tracking down their years in review is quite a task. But there will be links to all these reports in the episode descriptions. There's a nice little collation of those links. I can say up front, there's no X, no LinkedIn, no Threads, and no Discord reports.
By choice of made by you or by the platforms themselves?
No, couldn't find them. Discord had one for developers, but it was a bit too engineering focused and whatnot. But as is also a bit customary, I will start with the state of the pod.
Exactly.
And this year, I must say, I'm a little bit unhappy with the amount of content, and that only 12 episodes. This will be the 12th episode, which is my lower bound, bare minimum. Nevertheless, 454 minutes of content, 20,000 downloads. Last year, I forgot to check the Spotify stats to see who or what artists our listeners are listening to on that platform. They took away that feature for individual artists. But I can say that the listeners who do listen on Spotify prefer pop, rock, and rap.
And rap?
Yes, and I think it's been quite stable. There's Kanye West, Taylor Swift, Doja Cat are usually the ones, but I couldn't see that this year. They took that feature away.
We're so dependent on the way platforms themselves choose to structure their own reports.
Indeed, and a little bit of news in the sense that Google Podcast is shutting down, and they are definitely pushing more towards keeping the podcast on YouTube, and so the podcast is now on YouTube for those of you who...
An audio version of it.
An audio version.
Okay, great.
But yes, so I already have maybe 3 or 4 episodes lined up for next year, so I plan on hitting the ground running on some very interesting topics. So
as always.
All over the place, really. So let's begin with the overview of platform stats. And this year, happily, we can include Meta.
Yeah, I remember last year there was radio silence.
Indeed. But they didn't have a sort of traditional year in the view report, but they did have a sort of end of the year post on their newsroom or blog or whatever it's called. And they had a piece basically writing about their two biggest bets, which are AI and mixed reality advancements. And in particular, focusing on the intersection of those two. So you can think AI and the sort of
metaverse. The future metaverse.
Which they're kind of softening to mixed reality, which is fair enough. In the report, they talk about Llama and Llama 2. They're sort of open source LLMs that have been downloaded 100 million times and implemented into all sorts of applications. And what they were really kind of promoting was a feature where, as an example of these advancements, where you can take a photo and strip out the background and then use an AI-generated image as the background. They focused a lot also on the Ray-Ban Meta glasses and their Quest 3 headset, so their hardware, which is interesting because it connects to, we've been talking a lot about generative AI, and I know we're going to talk a lot about that.
We'll talk more. I was just going to say that's a topic.
But generative AI is only one genre of AI. And what they are sort of hinting at and signaling towards is embodied AI. And these are models that experience the world in the way that humans do.
That sounds exciting.
And so they're working toward this, and sort of what you can kind of pick up, I think the clues they're laying out in this report is that these Ray-Ban Meta glasses, in allowing computers to collect information on how we see the world, can be used to train models in a way that goes beyond the generative, but more towards building into the models how we experience the world and our perceptions.
Well, it's generative, but better trained, I guess. And apparently, just as a rumor, since you're not covering X, the idea that X will generate a lot of income through advertisement, that doesn't seem to work out very well for the platform. But another use that probably is even more profitable in the long run from his point of view is to use the data by users interacting with the X platform to train and refine AI models. And apparently a new privacy policy indicates that X will use very specific data, including biometric details from those who engage with the platform in order to refine the models. So basically Twitter X, it will be a pipeline for data generation and model improvement.
Which makes sense because that's also been a central aspect of a controversy around Reddit with the same logic that we can come back to, using that data to train LLMs. But I do think Meta definitely has reason to celebrate this year. I haven't checked their exact figures on the stock price, but it has massively recovered from its dip after the whole Apple privacy debacle. But I think what is interesting is the idea of they are clearly betting on a different form of AI, or they're marketing it as a different form of AI, which is using kind of first-person view perception as a way to increase understanding. Because, side note, I did do a little bit of looking into the root etymology of artificial and intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
As I tend to do.
That's one of my favorite subjects.
And intelligence is etymologically, like at its root form, about understanding. And so that's kind of, I think, the leap they're trying to make is that if you want to be intelligent, you need to understand. And to be more human-like, you need to understand like a human. And that's where the first-person Ray-Ban Meta glasses are coming in. While from the marketing side, it seems to me that they're very geared towards travel. I feel like they're marketing towards particularly American travelers. Everyone's going to be wearing their Ray-Ban Meta glasses.
I was actually very curious if they provide any stats about the sales of such objects. Is this a popular thing? Again, we're in Europe at the moment, so maybe they don't even sell it, but I have never encountered someone to tell me I'm using these Ray-Bans. So I'm just curious.
No, I don't know the sales figures, but these year in reviews generate thoughts from previous year in reviews where I remember discussing the whole marketing with Ray-Ban has to do with licensing because the company that owns Ray-Ban is like one of the major eyewear distributors. And so this is kind of a licensing thing. So I think once they get the hardware off the ground, and they do talk a lot about the challenges that they've overcome and having really, really low power, always on sensors. Like that's an engineering challenge because you have to have, you don't want to charge them too much. But they need to be collecting data all the time in a very low power way. So apparently Meta is really pumping the breakthroughs they've made. Still a ways to go, but that's the end goal, like using first person perception for model training.
exciting. We'll talk a lot about artificial intelligence this episode in various guises and for various purposes, but I think it will be a common denominator for many things we'll bring up, I think.
Definitely. So again, if you want to read more about what they said, it's down in the episode description. But let's move on to Instagram Trend Talk 2024. So this is a bit of a spin from, the classic, here's the top 5 posts, blah, blah, blah. They now every year release basically a survey with Gen Z to find out what the trends are. And this year's survey includes Gen Z participants from the US, the UK, Brazil, India, and South Korea. So a sort of global span, focusing on big democracies. And basically, a couple things picked out of the report. Sustainable fashion appears to be a trend, lots of thrifting, upcycling, etc. Apparently, Gen Z cares about having a core aesthetic, sort of something maybe links to their identity, and having a signature scent. 1/4 of respondents were interested in finding their signature scent. They prioritize meaningful connections. So in terms of engagement, it's kind of interesting. If they want to show connections with close friends and family, they do that through liking a story, sending reels or memes in DMs, and liking a post in a feed. That's what Gen Z does in terms of engagement. Quick note on dating. There are lots of singles in Gen Z, apparently 63%, and they're not looking for relationships. But what I did think was interesting is that 28% of Gen Zers exchange Instagram handles as opposed to phone numbers, if they're interested. Makes sense. And I go through these things to get to one of the key points was about activism, that Gen Z will take action through educating themselves and others, voting, and using social media to spread awareness. However, there were no figures or percentages cited for this, only the less interesting stuff, I would say.
Non-political stuff.
Exactly.
Non-obviously political, because everything is political eventually, but yes, no real political focus.
But I will say that of the year in review reports, at least activism was mentioned, something political, because a lot of these reports don't.
I think, as you yourself mentioned last year or the year before, a lot of the work put into these reports has to do with marketing of the usefulness of these companies as advertising platforms. So the focus for politics is less generating income for them. So I think that's the reason why they don't emphasize that political aspect.
They've definitely downplayed it. There used to be top 5 politicians discussed, but again, it's
also with a lot of controversies. This year has been a very polarizing, if I can use this term without loading too much into it, polarizing discussions and situations. So I think it's another way to be staying on the safe side for a lot of these platforms. Avoid bringing up subjects.
Definitely. And case in point would be TikTok. Year on TikTok, 2023. This one I'm not going to go so much through. I know everyone's interested in TikTok, but it's really a lot of just, entertainment stuff. What did the internal data and the kind of team putting this together think were their favorite TikToks, the breakthrough stars? They highlighted educational content. I was like, oh, interesting. What is that? Top one was how pencils have been sharpened over the years. So they market it as a place for learning, but I think anyone who's used the platform knows you're not really getting, it's not the type of educational content we might think of as educators.
Oh, the universities, they're conservative when it comes to comparing to TikTok.
But not to skip over the platform too much, I'll just highlight some kind of examples that was also prevalent on Instagram was girl dinner.
What is that?
Dinner. It is a trend that started people showing their very simple bread and cheese plates.
That's so funny. This is like full circle from 2010 when it was kind of cool to take a picture of your food, lunch, dinner, whatever. This with a social element added to it. But maybe they rediscover the wheel as we have in our time.
Yeah, I think it gets to the authenticity version, right? Like this is our girl dinner. It's something very simple. That's kind of the joke. Also, beige flags was a big one. And I had to look this one up.
Yes, never heard of.
But if you think about, it has a sort of romantic element to it with a partner. A red flag is something you would avoid. A beige flag is more like a slightly weird quirk that isn't particularly good or bad. It's just it's a beige flag. So it's not green flag, go for it. Red flag, stop. Beige flag,
in between.
Yeah, it's just a weird quirk. So an example would be some people were posting about how they haven't seen classic movies like Titanic. A little bit weird, but not
How
really
could you not?
anything. And then I thought about what would be my beige flag. And just being inspired by that one, it would be like, I don't watch much TV. And it's just a thing. It's not good. It's not bad. Just something I don't do that people might consider weird.
So then you cannot comment on the latest XY episode, whatever.
Yeah.
Because you're not in the loop with that.
Exactly. I mean, I'll watch some stuff on YouTube, whatever, but just don't have a TV. Never really wanted one or needed one. And I think some people would think that's weird. So that's my beige flag.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think it's like beige flag can also be like a insignia or sign of, being cool, like, yeah, this person doesn't engage into some specific and mass type of education. I've never watched, I don't know, Harry Potter films that 99% of the population in my generation has seen.
Yeah, it could be something like always starts dressing by putting their socks on first or something, like kind of.
That'd be funny.
Just doesn't really have much connotation, but that was a big one. And
beige flag. I wish politicians would come with beige flags, like not really warnings, but just like putting them on some spectrum.
So that was TikTok. Again, you can go read more about the individual things they were highlighting.
I have to say that I was reading in the New York Times, which is one of my sources of information, biased or not biased as it may be, about TikTok and the power of the Chinese state to still censor some concepts that are promoted by the TikTok algorithms. A research team from Rutgers University in the US has compared Instagram and TikTok hashtags and found that those hashtags probably more unpalatable to the Chinese government, such as Uyghurs in various spellings and Tibet various spellings, really don't quite catch on TikTok, whereas on Instagram they appear more regularly. So that led the Rogers team to say maybe indeed there is some form of Chinese government interference, to which the TikTok CEO said, no, your research is flawed. And in this way, I must echo one of your previous guests on the pod, Professor Joshua Tucker from NYU, saying that in order to really decide whether the Chinese government is or not is interfering or moderating away some topics, we as researchers should have access to the platforms. And this is something that I think we don't have across the platforms.
Yes, so +1 for cross-platform research, basically comparing Instagram and TikTok allows you to see what's not on TikTok. And just quick anecdote for those who are in the sort of data collecting world. TikTok does have an API. It does open it up for researchers. You apply. I applied this year, months ago now, no response. So they formally have a system, but you don't hear from them. So interesting.
Yes. I think that was the complaint that came not only from one individual's researcher's story, but from several research labs that were attempting to do exactly the same thing and were equally unsuccessful.
Yeah. You're on TikTok. Definitely, a platform to watch. But let's move on to the Reddit recap 2023.
Reddit, they could be more political. They used to be at least reporting more about politics.
Yes, and they do have a very detailed recap report. If I'm not mistaken, in 2022, it was authenticity was the key word. This year, it was honest feedback, so quite close to authenticity.
Same thing.
Rallying together, obsessing over pop culture, and elevating the everyday to the hilarious. Now, what is also kind of hilarious is that Reddit in June of this year had this huge, basically, community protest. And it relates to the LLMs, which is Reddit and the data, because Reddit also is closing free access to its platform because its data can be used to train these LLM models.
And they treat this some form of stealing the data? Or why would they do that? Like, what's wrong with the training?
It's just that
the
their data
models?
is more valuable, so they want to charge companies like OpenAI when they want to build ChatGPT 6 or whatever it is. They want to get some money off of that. But what that does is that it hurts all developers. There is an interface called Apollo, for example, that is a different interface to Reddit, like a third-party app that people like to use, but cannot operate because the cost would be it doesn't make money. Quick recap, apropos for those who weren't aware, in protest of this monetization of Reddit. And I really encourage listeners, if they haven't, to go and check out the last episode with Dr. Jennifer Forstall and really read that book, because her arguments about democracy in Reddit, it really is the most democratic space. And you saw this really in action in the summer when various subreddits decided they would, for example, start allowing not safe for work content, or they would say, all our users were going to talk about John Oliver, for example, instead of what our Reddit is about, our subreddit is about, as a way to protest. And then they have this R place, the interactive map, where, what kept popping up, users were putting fuck Spez, who Spez is the username of Stephen Hoffman, who is the CEO of Reddit. So really protesting like at the individual subreddit level, but also at the collective
bottom-up
platform
politics
level.
For the platform.
And the way that they dealt with this in the recap was not to mention it, but talk about rallying together, I think. So definitely interesting stuff happening on Reddit, and a good showcase for that as this kind of decentralized yet coordinated democratic platform. Interesting fun fact, even though it was the year of the rabbit in the Chinese zodiac, it was the year of the weevil on Reddit.
What's a weevil?
So it's a bug. It's a beetle, basically. But people fell in love with the weevil and then created their own subreddit, Weevil Time, with over 109,000 members, placing it in the top 2% of subreddits by size.
Wow. The things you learn.
Indeed. Am I the Asshole was the most visited for the third year running, where I think that's the idea of honest feedback coming from. Mildly Infuriating jumped from number 21 to number 3 in subreddit terms, which I think connects to this idea of beige flags. Like, there may be a connection, because if something's mildly infuriating, it's, not quite whatever. Keanu Reeves did an Ask Me Anything that was so popular, it finally surpassed the previous leader, who was Barack Obama.
I was thinking, I didn't dare say.
For the top Ask Me Anything. But it's
really
unclear how they calculate.
How they compared, yeah.
But when it comes to politics, they did highlight global events such as Hamas, Israel, and breaking news from Ukraine. So they marketed the platform as an important place for thought-provoking and serious discussion as well.
At least someone who acknowledges these things happening in the world. Another
common thread, AI. So they noted artificial intelligence was a buzzword, with our artificial intelligence going up 579%
wow.
in terms of views year over year. And there, the discussions were focused around explaining and dissecting neural networks, questioning ethical AI, and pondering the future of machine-human coexistence.
I love this stuff. I should be more active if only I had the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really long report breaking things down by fashion, gaming, sports. They listed some predictions, which nothing in terms of politics, but they did predict that the praying mantis would overtake the weevil next year. And we'll see.
This will keep them accountable for Year in Review 2024.
So interesting stuff happening on Reddit, but yeah. In terms of what I thought was interesting to report here. Pinterest predicts.
Yes.
Pinterest. So theirs is always focused on using platform data to predict the trends next year. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to spend so much time here because just give you an idea of what they were talking about. And they always have funny names for each little category. Groovy nuptials.
Huh.
Which essentially is they're picking up that people are looking for 70s style weddings.
Okay.
They predict a comeback.
It's that wheel of fashion, it goes around and around. So now we're in the 70s.
Aquatecture. So
what is that?
People searching for small aquarium design and turtle terrariums. That is up on the platform. And giving a scrap. So upcycling, DIY projects, using leftovers in recipes.
I do think actually this is really a trend. This environmental mindedness that is taken down from big climate goals that are discussed in IPCC panels and so on, and trying to use that as a way to make these climate adjustments palatable to people. I've seen also myself in various articles, but also in personal experience, quite a lot of this type of content that caters to everyday small practices from food to fashion to transportation or travel, reading, and so on. That is this under the keyword sustainability. And I think it's so popular with Gen Z that now it kind of broke the barriers of generations, and it's become something that everyone is concerned with. And it's also making climate adjustments a little bit fun, like a challenge. How can I use this leftovers? Is this good? Giving grades, giving feedback, or can I buy secondhand? I think there's actually been a boost in the sites that provide secondhand shopping of various things, from clothes, but also to devices like music devices or stereos or stuff like that. They also exist much more this year than last year and the year before. There's a trend for people that follow this, in a sense, the cues they get from Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, etc. They seem to want to apply, and so there's a market for secondhand thrift-based exchanges. Can be buying and selling, or really like barter, like we exchange. And I think this is happening also in Facebook groups and so on. How do we exchange stuff instead of buying new?
Definitely an uptick in thrift culture in general. And I would say that one platform that really, really benefits from this financially, that's not really a social media, would be Etsy. Because people are looking to purchase more DIY from
or upgrade it, take an old item, recast it, tailor it, and so on. And I think, of course, this is not immediately political, but it does, I think, hint to this environmental mindedness writ small, as opposed to these big words. And I think this can eventually trickle down over some years into the political orientation and preferences of generations that are now just beginning to enter the voting space.
Yeah, and one last thing I'll say is that in Sweden, and especially in Malmö, here where I live, the big thrift scene, and I've definitely noticed that there are more stores that are explicitly not just selling vintage Levi's, which is always a big draw, especially for Swedes, but repaired Levi's. So they actually work on site to fix holes with patches, and they actually sell those almost at a higher premium because people want to buy them.
It's an artistic product,
Exactly.
right? And these are the type of videos also that I have seen and heard about, that how to repair your sweater with a hole in an artistic way. Not hide that hole, but make it beautiful, because to reuse is beautiful. And it's a mindset that I think, as I said, it will probably influence the priorities of new generations whenever they come to be taking over the political space.
Definitely. I think so. And definitely you can see it across the different platforms with the Instagram trends, and upcycling was there as well. So it's a thing, surely. Snap.
Oh, I almost forgot it exists,
The
right?
Snap.
It used to be very dominant, and now in my world, maybe not as much.
No, and I gotta say, it is it's a platform that I've definitely lost touch with, but I love their year in review report because it's short, to the point, and just does this. Here's the top 5.
So what are the top 5?
There's only a few of them. Top lenses, which, yeah, again, totally out of the loop, but Baby Cheeks, Anime AI, AI Universe, Sibling, and Goofy Gaze. Those are your top 5 augmented reality lenses. Top trending moments, something we can at least latch on to a bit more accurately. Valentine's Day, music festival season, back to school, Halloween, spring fashion. That's what people are snapping about. Makes sense. Festivals. Back to school is a bit
maybe because the population, the youth, is in the loop with those cycles.
Halloween, I can totally see. Top places. Number 1 top place, the Dubai Mall. That's where people are, I guess, geolocating. It didn't specify. Magic Kingdom Park, which I think is Disney World in some form or another. Eiffel Tower, Times Square, and Fenway Park baseball stadium.
Yay, Boston!
So that's Snap. It's just, here's the top 5, boom, 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 and I appreciate that.
Not so much politics there either. I guess we'll talk more about that. But there might be also a trend from the platforms to shy away, and from politicians to really actively do that. it's complicated. It's getting more complicated. It used to be a taken for granted place for politics, and now it's beginning to be a little bit more, complicated.
It is. They're definitely downplaying it for sure. Twitch annual recap. They talked about the top viewed clips and the streamers by each region, and they listed the top emotes, which are those little things that float around on Twitch. But that's all I have to say about Twitch. I don't get the platform at all, to be honest.
But it's still going strong, right? Like
still
they
going
have
strong.
Their core public of gamers.
Feeling old right now. Let's go to Google, year in search.
Yes.
So they always have this yearly video where they highlight something. Heroes was one year. This year it's 25 years, which I think it's the 25th anniversary of Google. Either it was this year or it will be next year. So they had this video kind of highlighting what was the really most search performance, for example, and they showed Beyonce or most searched superhero. And they show Spider-Man. So you really have to kind of dig in. It's not very clear from the video. You have to use the visual with the text to make these things out, but nothing
surprising,
super political there. They have this interactive kind of like Where's Waldo type map where you can look for the 5 most searched people over time. Kind of cool. Check the links if you want to burn some time. They did have some trends for 2023 and sort of picking out what might be interesting there. In terms of global search, Israel Gaza took number 1. The Titanic submarine, if you remember that,
yes.
That took the world by storm. The Turkey earthquake, which was a big event, and the other 2 were 2 hurricanes. So you kind of have interesting this, just looking at these things. I mean, apart from kind of man-made conflict, 4 of them deal with some kind of earth element, right? Like this,
natural change.
How low or how deep can the submarine go? And then you have 3 natural disasters, which makes sense. People look for information.
Crisis communication through Google, right? Optimize your pages, governments.
Also on Google, they had lots of different top categories of most searched, but they used to have politicians, no more. But when it comes to people, the number 1 most searched person was Damar Hamlin, who was an American football player who essentially collapsed on the field. He was hit at the same time the electrical impulse in your heart can collapse. So it looked like he died on the field, but
he survived?
He survived.
Oh.
And then Andrew Tate was number 3.
Digital personality.
Somewhat political there, but that's Google.
And Taylor Swift?
Oh,
no?
She was probably there.
Yeah.
Top celebrities or something. But
in everything that I read, she is always appearing as the personality of the year. That's why I was curious.
She's definitely prominently featured. And we'll come back to some more Swift talk later in the episode. 2 more platforms. YouTube. They didn't have a year in review per se. They didn't have a report, but they did have a piece explaining what their policies and systems are around the 2024 election. Basically saying that we recommend election news from authoritative sources, obviously removing hate inciting content towards election workers. They mentioned that, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, because of that lawsuit in the US.
Also removing harmful conspiracy theories. So not all conspiracy theories, just harmful ones. Interesting. They don't allow ads that promote demonstrably false claims, comparing that to Facebook and Zuckerberg, who said that he would do that because it's not his role to judge. YouTube takes a strong position, and they don't allow ads to run on videos that promote demonstrably false claims.
This point brings up an interesting comment that may be pertaining to politics to some extent, namely that this past year, Sweden has seen almost an epidemic of Quran burnings. The main actor driving a lot of these events is a person that showed live or showed snippets of this on TikTok and monetized. So even though he was not officially prohibited from doing that because of freedom of speech, the Swedish government asked TikTok to not allow him to monetize, basically the type of activity that YouTube would prevent him from doing. But TikTok did not change course. So these TikToks generated ads and in turn generated income from this radical citizen or wannabe politician. So it's interesting how this actually does have a political tail, even if or maybe not thinking too much politics about it.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because I checked that guy out and he doesn't have another source of income, so he claims. So
Yeah.
the argument could be that he's burning Korans to
To make
generate
money.
income, or
Yeah,
potentially.
as long as that source of income is open, that speculation can be about the genuine nature of his convictions or the reason that he declares to do things for.
Part of that controversy was that TikTok takes a cut of that revenue. So they are also indirectly making money on Koran burning. So that was kind of a little bit of the
second level of radicalization online. But I just wanted to comment about this because it is a big deal for YouTube to take such an explicit and strong stance. Let's see if it's implemented, but as a policy, I think it sounds pretty good.
Yeah. They also have a blurb about AI-generated content in the sense that they require advertisers to disclose when they use, so they allow it, but it must be disclosed. And when it comes to election content, this will be displayed in the video player as well in the description of the video.
This is Google's policy as a whole, since YouTube is owned by Google, and Google unilaterally and as a form of company policy proposed this and enforces this. Any kind of material media that is generated by its models is going to be marked both explicitly and is in a digital watermark in the medium itself, so that it can be identified by software. Google is the only company that took that very strong and hard stance.
And it also is maybe the most, YouTube being really the most focused on video at a concept level. So maybe they have to take
Instagram,
No, but I mean, YouTube fundamentally was, from the beginning. So maybe but yeah, you're right, Instagram. And they're combating influence operations. Big surprise.
This is also a point that I will return to a little bit later, I think. So stay tuned.
So let's close out the mainstream social media platforms with that and go on to my favorite part of the year, Pornhub Insights 2023 year in review.
Anything about politics in this?
Could be. I think one of the reasons I like, well, first of all, the Pornhub Insights team is really good at talking about stuff. Like this is the most detailed report by far. Different regions, all kinds of crazy stuff, different genders and sexual orientations and what people are searching. But what I think is interesting about it is like last year, the keyword from Reddit Recap was authenticity. And then the Pornhub Insights team was saying they were seeing an uptick in amateur porn searches. So there is, it gives a sense maybe of the general digital zeitgeist. Anyway, this year, the number one trend, according to Pornhub, was, they call it the golden age. So searches for older people, mature, MILF, granny. These are not the most searched terms, but this is the one they saw the most improvement this year.
MVP.
So people looking for older actors and actresses. Number two was size, so adding huge or big before certain body parts went up double or triple.
This is actually correlated many times. Like whenever people are looking for oversize, anything is related to a perception of scarcity. This is what we know from marketing research. Yeah. So basically, you're looking for something you don't see a lot. So maybe it's a question of just like lack of or being in not a prosperous state.
No comment. But getting to number three, which does get into the zeitgeist, is an uptick in sex machines. So androids, sex robots.
Oh, really?
AI, human interaction.
Embodied AI, apropos what you were saying before.
Exactly. But also literal machines that do things to people. And
okay.
That's
a beige flag.
Don't want to speculate more on that. And I'll go through one more, which is number four, uniforms, which is interesting because a lot of police, but also a big spike in soldiers, which may kind of reflect real world
conflict.
events. So there is something we can learn from Pornhub Insights. Now in the US, again, this idea of like mature porn is the number one upcoming trend they found this year, but the overall top searched in the United States, which remains in place from last year as well, is lesbian. And there may be a political link here. Because,
in which way?
Because I read 4chan quite a bit whenever one of these things happens, like the Prague shooting, or I like to just go and see what's happening, what they're saying over there. And from what I get from reading those discussions is that there is a part of this like hard right movement is that if you're gonna watch porn, which is seen as a sort of weakness and you shouldn't do it, if you're gonna do it, you should watch lesbian porn because
Why?
because there's no guy. And so it's not as a demasculating thing to do.
Jeez.
So that could be potentially a reason that takes it to the top. I'm not sure.
At least it's more normalized, perhaps. I don't know. This is a domain in which I can only speculate without any academic credentials.
There's much more I could say. It's super detailed. You can go and check out the report to learn more. But I will say one last political thing is that they often look at big events and check traffic.
Exactly. I remember this from every year.
There was a 10% decrease in the UK during the coronation of King Charles. But then what's interesting is you can literally see then there's a spike afterwards. So people overcompensate for lost time on the Pornhub
No
platform.
lost time. Coronation of King Charles. This year in review for me, it brings this passage of time to a more quantitative dimension because I know about all these events, but it's hard sometimes to have the perception that all of this happened in 1 year. From Taylor Swift and the Charles coronation to the Hamas-Israel war to, Zelensky traveling to, 100 destinations this year. It's like, wow, all of this in 1 year. The COP conference, all this is concentrated. Sometimes it feels like how can it all have place in just 365 days? But I guess we do a lot of stuff, we humans. A lot of stuff is important. So, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of stuff has happened this year. It's always...
Is there like one thread that you see across these or across most of these?
No, I wish I did have a clearer one. I mean, it was much easier in the early days when they would give, here's a top five, and you could see the patterns. The way these are structured is all different, and clearly what they're not saying is often important. But I mean, I think one red thread is just AI. And this was the year of AI. There's no doubt about it.
And I guess this is where I'm picking it up with my first gift.
Boom, boom, boom.
And by this point, no surprise. My conversation topic or my prediction is AI. This year has been the year of true popularization of generative AI. And I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of AI, but one thing that is interesting is that while AI or artificial intelligence is a tag everyone wants to hang on to, and it's a keyword companies promote or platforms promote, or even individual people want to advertise, actually the meaning of AI is not something commonly shared. There was a Pew Research poll that was published at the beginning of 2023 that asked Americans what do they know about AI and how confident are they in identifying AI. And the results in some would point at about a third of Americans would actually be able to identify when AI touches them in the everyday, like in their mobile phones or interaction with other digital products, whereas the other 2/3 were far more uncertain what is actually AI and in which way is that relevant for them, which I think is a trend we don't see just in the United States, but it's something more general. So AI being a buzzword is connected also to AI being an empty signifier, just something cool and digital and interesting, but not really a known variable. Which opens a lot for the marketing use of AI. People saying, this product has been generated using AI, but for those who actually work with AI, more times than no, it's not quite that advanced. It's just statistics, right? Or regular statistics. But beyond that idea or perception of AI, I wanted to say that indeed AI has been identified as the number one emerging technology by pretty much any consultancy group, any study group, and so on and so forth. So there's no doubt that we are in an AI honeymoon. Basically, everyone is investing in AI. Everyone thinks about using various parts of AI for their own business or even in governmental service. And there's a whole branch called AI in public sector that tries to use AI in an ethical way, but nevertheless mind those possibilities for the citizens. So that's quite a lot to say. EU, as always, as the number one regulator, was having a head start on this, and two very important legislative acts have been passed during 2023. One is called the Data Services Act, and the one just recently passed, I believe less than a month ago, is called the AI Act. And both of these make the EU the most important regulator, the one that sets the standards. And that is also the explicit goal of these legislative acts, sets the standards for how AI can be used in a, let's say, good way, ethical way, non-harmful way. The way the European Commission calls the good way is called trustworthy AI. And the trustworthiness comes from the transparency aspect, and there are several regulations around that, but also from some form of certification or ensuring that the AI products, not only the way, like the process, but the actual outputs are not going to be used to harm humans. So that's the goal. Many people say that this is very good, we need this, and that indeed they hope these standards would be upheld all over the world. Many other people that are more libertarian, perhaps, in their approach, criticize the European approach, saying that it stifles competition, it stifles development, and allows counterpowers, for example, China, to basically improve their models, improve their AI development, because they do not necessarily subscribe to the same ethical way, trustworthy way in doing AI. So that's a big thing that is a technology as a whole, but will have, and I can discuss in more detail how, impact on politics.
So if I can link a little bit to those things, I mean, yes, AI is a buzzword. I'm dreading the amount of conference presentations I'll sit on that deal with AI, even though we all sort of know it doesn't really mean much. But also with public sector communication, I mean, one thing that I did do recently is watch Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI.
The back and forth CEO, which was another big scandal this year, right?
Who was apparently expelled because of the idea around trustworthy, right? That the board thought he was moving in a too cavalier manner. But I was curious to hear what OpenAI. What OpenAI.
The makers of ChatGPT.
Exactly. Yeah. And the next thing, it appears from watching that kind of development conference, is they are really pushing and proud to launch what they're calling GPTs, which are essentially ways for different businesses and organizations to easily customize their own ChatGPT. So these, like, customizing the ChatGPT logic to fit your organization, which could be public sector. I mean, really, they've made it fast. They've made it easy, where you can basically tell the model, this is what I want. This is what I want a GPT to do. And the GPT will be your customized.
Yeah, you can train your own chat. It's wonderful. It opens up many possibilities, and it has so many implications for every single walk of life. Both of us are university teachers, as the audience probably by now understood. The way we will teach, the way we will examine, the way knowledge in general will be transmitted is probably in the not too far away future will be different. But going back to the politics and the use of AI for politics, I think there are some interesting examples that perhaps indicate where we're heading. And my number one example, just for the sake of the brevity, is to look at the relatively recent Argentinian presidential elections. Also a big event because a very controversial candidate ended up being the winner of those elections. Milei is his name, and is a person that talks to his dead dog and cloned that dog repeatedly, which is also just a little bit of a flavor of the person.
I now that you say it, I remember reading that and thinking, that's pretty smart.
Yeah.
You liked your dog, you don't want to get a new one, just clone it.
But he's not the only one that is at the edge of technology, if you want. One of his competitors, the center-left Argentinian presidential loser, we can say Sergio Massa, he is not shying away from AI. So he basically campaigned using posters that were fully AI generated. And I just want to quote for the sake of entertainment, but also to give us all, even though it's a podcast and we don't have a visual, that kind of message that you want to put into these prompts. The prompt said, do a poster for Massa inspired by a Soviet political propaganda featuring a leader, Massa, standing firmly. Symbols of unity and power fill the environment. And there's an image that basically shows the AI treated portrait of Sergio Massa in this kind of Soviet style. And what I think will happen is not only like a threat to the communicator illustrator branch of industry, but also this idea that this type of technology will empower pretty much every politician, especially those that are maybe not so well financed. So those that are more underdogs, more at the extremes of the political spectrum without the benefits of a flow of cash from the governments or from donors, to use AI to create images that would then populate social media accounts, Instagram, TikToks, etc. But also that will speak very quickly to the stance of this person's politician's point of view on current events. So they'll be very quick to react, they will be very quick to communicate, and that would also tag on this visual turn in communication. Everyone that does social media comms in every branch, politics or commercial, will know that video is still king, that image still rules, no text, but just visuals. That would enable political messages to be transmitted into this kind of visual way, especially since these image generators are terrible at writing text. So it has to be through the power of image alone, no text, no embedded text. And I think that would, first of all, empower a lot of politicians, candidates to look better. And it would enable them also to just reach an audience that is more familiar with this type of interfacing, a lot of visual interfaces. So Massa is one precursor. And if I have time to give another example, I wanted to bring up a non-campaign situation, and that is the official sanctioning of a deep fake. And that happened in Sweden. I'm not sure. I might almost claim this is the first official deep fake video. The Sweden Democrats, a party that is considered by many an extreme right, or at least anti-immigration right-wing party, to be polite. Its leader, Jimmy Åkesson, has produced, or the party communicators have produced, a deep fake of the talk to the nation or speech to the nation, entirely translated to Arabic. And this is not a translation with subtitles, which obviously is by this point normal. This is an artificial intelligence generator, which is available commercially everywhere, in which Jimmy Åkesson's own voice and image in terms of mouth movement and face movement is basically overlaid with an Arabic way. I don't know if we could listen to a little comparison, but basically he was filmed giving the speech in Swedish, and then using AI tools, the party generated the parallel version of this with him looking as if he currently speaks Arabic, which he does not.
Right, and if I can give some extra context to listeners outside of Sweden, there's a lot of immigrants, including myself, and one of the reasons that there hasn't been so many podcasts this year is we've been trying to learn Swedish better. But there are many immigrants in Sweden who do not speak Swedish. Many of them have Arabic backgrounds, or Arabic is their native tongue. And so therefore, he put his party platform speech to the nation, State of the Union-ish from their party perspective, in Arabic so that they could understand, also to get a bit of media play. Let's be real.
Which is exactly what I wanted to comment. Because they are the first party to use the AI tools, they've got a lot of coverage. And this is, I think, my kudos go to the mastermind of their public comms. They don't ever pay for advertisement, but they do provocative things that generate organic spread of their message.
Earned media.
Media.
So we'll play a little bit of the audio so that you can compare the real and the deep fake. But I want to kind of set the stage a bit, what we're looking at, which is it's Jimmy Åkesson in a suit staring directly at the camera with a large Swedish flag behind him on the left, kind of standard press conference type of thing. And then,
a lake.
But very clear that he's front and center. And I want to return to that in a second. But let's hear the Swedish version first, just maybe 15, 20 seconds.
Sverige, svenskar, Sverigevänner i hjärtat. Vårt land mår inte bra, milt uttryckt. Vår värld mår inte bra. Det håller på att gå fullständigt åt helvete på ren svenska.
And just for the benefit of translation, he says, Swedes, our country is not doing well. Actually, to be honest, it's going to hell.
Which is interesting because they're not in the governing coalition. But,
formally.
But they are outside, which allows them this flexibility because if they were...
They're both opposition and government.
Exactly.
But let's hear the Arabic deep fake version.
أيتها السويد أيها السويديون يا أصدقاء السويد في القلب بلادنا ليست في حالة جيدة لنقلها بلطف.
Neither of us speak Arabic, but we can see, and perhaps there will be more information or a link to this video, that this is a very convincing at first glance artifact. And the most interesting part is that this is a political communication tool. In this case, it is more of a publicity for the party. I don't think this is posting this Arabic version of the speech to the nation on the party's own YouTube channel is not necessarily intended to reach the Arabic-speaking Swedes that you mentioned as a potential audience, which also was the declared audience of this video. I think the intended reason was to gather a lot of publicity, and the video has been seen by more than 500,000 viewers. It got more than 500,000 views. But I think if we are to think, okay, how can political communication use the benefits of AI? Well, if you do honestly want to reach populations that don't have the main language as their first language, and you know that there's some language barriers there, in good faith, you could try to make such short snippets in which you as the political leader or your representatives can engage with this population to, in a sense, acknowledge their existence, their concerns, their cultural norms, and so on and so forth.
You can definitely imagine American politicians speaking in Spanish, for example.
And I think wasn't it Hillary Clinton back in the day, it feels like forever ago, but maybe in 15, 16, she did have ads in Spanish.
Yeah, and that's one thing that, for example, Bernie Sanders, I know from analyzing some of his social media posts, I mean, he'll take the same image and then he'll translate it into 26 different languages and post it, so it's in Yiddish and
exactly.
Spanish.
And that AI basically would help in this process, make it more available. So you don't necessarily have this just for those parties and politicians that have the cash to show. This is a free tool, I believe, the one that they have used, the Sweden Democrats have used.
Yeah,
so,
I think it's a very smart, especially from the earned media side. It's a very smart, first adoption. It also points to a real world issue, which is there's a lot of people that don't speak Swedish, and this creates a lot of problems for the public media and so on, having to get translators. So there's a critique implied by the need for it in the first place. But what I also wanted to point out is that this direct address to camera without much facial movement to the side, without much in the background, this is very conducive to making
it lends
a deepfake.
itself
like this format is exactly what many. I don't know what tool they use, but you can find, Python
there's several
packages that do this. I've played around with it myself, and you really want to have this exact, clean, direct-to-camera type of thing. So in that sense, it's a very good use case for the tools available.
This would be a reference, I think, for those politicians who want to continue to use this kind of method, right, to reach audiences or to get publicity. But basically, this is one of the points I'm trying to make. AI is basically transpiring into everything. Everything we do will have an AI companion, a co-pilot, as Microsoft calls it. There will be this kind of human-AI partnership in pretty much every walk of life. And I think politicians that are daring enough will benefit to some extent from this, at least in this period. And politicians that are very careful, that take into account the privacy and ethics of data use and AI use, may be reluctant to engage with this technology. And in this case, they will be laggards in the adoption of such AI practices.
I push back a bit in the sense that I think even with the transformative technology, I think history is a guide in the sense that when we have, for example, well-financed politicians, particularly in the 2024 US election, you're not going to see this so much at the top. You may see it from challengers, but you'll see a lot of innovation in down ballot campaigns because they can actually benefit from the copywriting and so on. And they also have a sort of better incentive to lean on these tools. I think it will not be until 2028 that you'll see the top of ticket campaigns learning from innovations from failed campaigns at more down ballot and local races, or statewide races. So I think it will take, this is not going to be the AI election, I think. I think it will be, if history is a guide, it will be an experimentation phase, but Biden and Trump are not going to dive into this. It will be the Democratic and Republican Party after the election will look at the innovations that happen down ballot and then professionalize that maybe in the midterms so that when 2028 is here, then we'll start seeing this type of stuff.
The AI sandbox, if you wish. I think
prototype campaigns.
I couldn't. I would agree to a large extent, but I would also caution in terms of the technological abilities. Viewers of the pod who may engage with this particular example from Sweden will notice that this particular deep fake is not excellent. So if you are an Arabic speaker and you watch this, you will notice some things that look a little bit uncanny, right? I'm pretty confident that the technology by 2024, which will be a hot year for many elections, that the technology will be sufficiently improved, in particular if you're willing to pay for it. That means for bigger candidates with bigger budgets, that you could basically transform anything into anything. In the Swedish elections of 2022, which is not this year but last year, the current Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, had a little insert in which he thanked personally and had a little cup with the name of mainstream names in Sweden, non-ethnic Swedes and ethnic Swedes like Maria och Mia och Elin och Malin och Robert och så. And he was basically recording all these names by himself. I am absolutely positive, should a different version of this individual outreach happen, it will happen with the help of AI. Even mainstream campaigns will basically design this kind of personalized connections, inserting into an otherwise non-AI generated image or video elements of AI. So I think this kind of co-production will become sooner than 2028, in my view, and this is when we'll meet again in 2024 and discuss this. But I think this kind of co-production will become the norm for campaigns already in 2024, and we'll see the United States elections, but we'll also see the European Parliament elections in May, end of May of next year. So,
but if it's on YouTube, there will be a disclaimer in both the video.
Exactly.
And
It
the
depends
text.
which model and so on. We'll have more to talk about AI in the future, but I stop here to say that we're seeing already the beginning of a new technology supported change in political communication.
Yeah, it does lead into my second gift, which I tentatively call the politics of the creator economy.
Okay.
Or politics in the creator economy. It's kind of a half-baked thing I've been thinking about, so I just kind of want to talk it out a bit on the podcast, because coming up next year will be the 20th anniversary of Facebook.
Oh my God. How old are we?
And so I was maybe thinking a bit about I think listeners of this podcast are familiar with the cyber optimists and cyber pessimist argument. But, just going back to that, the internet is a civic space and it's going to open up all this participation and public discussion. And what I've been thinking about a lot is the creator economy, in the sense that the general convergence across all these platforms, despite their different features and functions and whatever, it seems like we're moving towards a model where just a small number of people are creating the mass majority of content to such a level, and this is kind of what surprised me about social media, is that kind of centralization of content creation has worked to, I would argue, disincentivize people from producing.
Like no user as individual user generated content.
I mean, of course there is, right? But like we've talked for a long time in research about, the lurkers or the listeners who
the majority of the population on social media.
I remember a deep poll, but at some point I heard a stat from Denmark that was like 12% of people with a Twitter account on Denmark are posting. And then within that, you have a small number that's posting a lot. And that's kind of morphed into creators, I would argue, where of course there's exceptions to this, but in general, it's like, are you going to be a content creator and really produce content for the platform? Or are you going to be, I would say there's two levels. One is, I would call the peanut gallery, which is the people who just respond to content. And usually you see this on, Twitter replies and Reddit, people are.
YouTube comments.
But they're posting in response to something. Usually. That's where the majority of that content is. And then there's people who don't post anything, who just watch.
Don't do anything at all.
And then you get to this inception level where you have content creators who are making videos of them reading the peanut gallery comments and commenting on that. And so it's like this weird cycle.
I think I'm going to be a little bit philosophical, but what I think we have seen is in the late 90s, early 2000 up to 2000, mid 2010s. Yeah, I think we have seen a certain unsettling of the old elites in general. We have seen a period of upheaval when, let's quote unquote, everything was possible. And I think that on the social media realm, and piggybacking on your comment about the creator economy, we have seen people that were not destined to be great public authorities, but that were the right people for the right time at the right place, and that became established as such content creators. People that now have between 500,000 and 1 million followers on a variety of platforms. Yeah. People that cover the widest range of things, from PewDiePie to makeup artists, fashion commentators, historical sewing pattern leaders, cooks and cooking personalities, and basically everything else under the sun. I think in the last year in review, or 2 years before, we talked about the podcast industry and how so many podcasts exist out there, but only a very small percentage really gets most of the traction. And of those top percentages, most of that comes from established media industry outlets like The Economist, The New York Times, Slate. And this kind of, I think we are now, in chronological terms, at the end of this upsettling, revamping period. Things have moved around a little bit. Old industries have become digitalized, have woken up to AI, social media, and all these things. And in the meantime, some new and unexpected content creators, influencers, figures have emerged. And they are there, and they will probably continue to be there. But it's true in that sense that I agree with you. I don't see this path being open for new content creators similarly equipped. I think this arena has been taken, and there is a demotivation, de-incentivization, if you can say so, for new generations to occupy or contend to this space.
I agree and disagree. I get your point that there's a sort of consolidation of the existing players, but there's definitely still a chance for upward mobility. Okay, I'm using two academic terms. Yeah, I do think there's definitely ample opportunities for people to break through, and there's a big will for people to break through into being a creator full-time, because And you see this in surveys where for teens, that is consistently the number one thing kids want to be is a YouTuber, 3 times more so than astronaut, which was the previous number one, and which was also my number one when I was a kid. But yeah, it really is consistently, this is what kids want to do. And I do think there are new influencers coming up, but it's more difficult. And I think where we do agree is that if you want to be an influencer, you have to create content, and it's like that's the model rather than this civic space of everyone just producing. And I've been thinking about this. So a couple of reasons for why is that when there was all of this cyber optimism, there was not things like DMs and encrypted apps. So there was no back channel communication.
No.
So everything was kind of de facto public. And so once you give that option, then of course people take that, and then you're left with just a handful of content creators. But I want to talk a little bit about the creator economy a little bit. I was trying to read up on this, and I've seen estimates that value it at between potentially $100 billion up to $250 billion. Goldman Sachs thinks it could double to $500 billion before 2027. And it's kind of interesting that there was an explosion in the content creator pool because of COVID, right? Which makes sense. People had time. They decided, let me see if I can get this channel off the ground. Now, with returning to work plus inflation, people can no longer be full-time content creators because marketers are shrinking.
New content creators.
And even old ones. The ones that were on the border, because there's less marketing budgets, there's more inflationary pressure. And so, I guess I'm thinking this kind of out loud, is I'm surprised that with all this development in social media, it seems to be going towards this model of content production is in the hands of a few. I don't know what that means for politics. It's definitely not the public town hall debate, obviously not. But it does get to this idea of political creators, influencers, and some interesting stuff on that front. I want to bring up 2 big things. One is that the White House recently had their White House holiday receptions, which is sort of like a swanky event where they invite people to look at Joe Biden's Christmas decorations, regardless how you feel about those from the video. But this year, there was a large number of content creators who were invited. And the reason is that the White House Office of Digital Strategy organized the party. So they invited a bunch of creators to come to the party. And, well, first of all, Jill Biden gets up and she says, you're invited because you all represent the changing way people receive news and information. So there's a clear courting effort on the part of the White House to involve creators. And getting a little glimpse into the strategy on the back end, they look for representation of the racial and ethnic diversity of the creators, but also of the audiences they represent. That's a glimpse into what they're thinking about. So it's there. And why are creators important? Influencers, let's say, on TikTok. Why might the White House want to court them? Well, of course, it's this new way of getting information, but it's also the fact that TikTok doesn't allow political advertisements. So you need to pay an influencer to carry your message.
Or organically connect.
So it points, I think, again, to the idea that I don't think, this is my prediction, that influencers are not particularly persuasive or powerful in their message. Maybe, but I don't think that's the real reason that politicians want to use them. They want to use them to get over these
limitations,
platform policies around not advertising.
Okay, in the interest of time, I will keep myself brief, even though I think it's a very interesting thought. And there's also some research around this, which partly has been covered already by some previous podcast episodes. But what I wanted to say is that it's not the size of the audience that matters, but the faithfulness of those viewers. You don't, like a good influencer or a credible influencer is not necessarily the person that may have 2 million followers or whatever, but is that influencer account that consistently gets most of those followers to engage by liking, interacting, and so on and so forth with their content. So there are influencers that are mobilizing their audiences, and those could be more politically useful than those other influencers that are watched and passively observed by many, but that don't generate a lot of calls for action. So I think there's a distinction there.
I break in here because I have a thought that just came to me, and I think it's valid. I hope someone tests this, is that one thing that influencers offer is precisely getting around the fragmentation of platforms, the idea that people are spread out. So briefly, to take a step back, one of the challenges with the 2024 US election is that the place where people are actually watching television, Netflix, Amazon Prime, do not allow political ads. So people are tuning out of traditional TV and they're going to these streaming services. The second challenge, and I'm pulling this directly off of Eric Wilson's latest newsletter, in case he's listening. He was writing about this, which is there's the challenge of the platform policy not allowing political advertisements, but there's also the challenge of the fact that people are just using different platforms. Content creators generally have a presence across multiple platforms. So if they carry your message on Instagram, they will probably carry it on TikTok. And that is a way to go around, first of all, the platform policy of not allowing for advertisements. But secondly, if your creator is present on 6 platforms, you get that message out on 6 platforms. And it's probably cheaper and more efficient to do that
than to advertise specifically.
And to create content for 6 different platforms.
And this is something that is very clear that I think we can summarize like use existing channels rather than start up a new channel of any kind for a particular campaign, project, candidate, and so on. I think this is definitely the way to go. And if it's a practical lesson from this episode is this: use existing channels, use established programs in order to basically piggyback on those structures or personalities or whatever. But I think this also will be a nice transition into my last gift.
Not yet.
Not yet,
I have
though.
I have two last things to
Okay,
say,
then,
which is
go ahead.
It goes to your point about it's not the size of the influencer, but the
faithfulness of the audience.
The faithfulness. But I put this example together earlier this year, which goes to your point, but I think it also goes to my point where getting at the effectiveness of influencer communication. And who is the top influencer?
Taylor Swift.
Exactly. So
I knew that one.
So, I mean, if you want to take the upper bound, highest example of influencer, it would be Taylor Swift, but not in this, engaging the audience type of way necessarily, but she is just mega size.
Everything she does is under scrutiny and everything she does matters.
So let's play with this example of she has 242 million Instagram followers-ish.
Which is a gigantic number.
She posted on her Instagram story earlier this year to register to vote for National Vote Registration Day.
I remember that story about the story.
Apropos earned media, right? It was all over the news. The organization that she linked to, vote.org, received on this day 35,000 new registrations. Not all of those came from Taylor Swift. And I forget the exact number, but it was maybe like a 25% increase from previous years because they do this every year. So getting young people to register to vote. Taylor Swift has an audience of 242 million. Not all of them American. Many of them are already registered to vote. But just play with the example. 242 million followers, 35,000 vote.org registrations, not all of them from her message, but if you take the highest level of her followers and the highest, let's say all of them were attributed to her, that would be a 0.0001% conversion rate on taking action. So essentially not different from zero. And so that's just food for thought, not very scientific, but it does signal, I think, to me that even if you have Taylor Swift ask something, when you put it in proportion, it's not the magic bullet.
I think in general, and also that's more speculative than grounded in many academic studies, I think you cannot isolate the effect. Yeah, it either from one particular source, there has to be, reinforcing messages. So not just one day or once a week, but consistently referring to something, voting, whatever. And the other one is click-through. How do we measure? Like measurement of performance of communication. I think this is one of the biggest black boxes.
But this is a direct test. I mean, it's, again, I realize it's flawed, but it's a direct. I think you should have more than 35,000 vote.org registrations with a 242 million audience.
In order to do this proper test, you would probably need to take into account those factors that you already outlined in terms of the popularity of Taylor Swift outside the United States and her popularity with those who were already minded. And I think we should see this event in a sequence of Taylor Swift's overall practice, her relationship with that football player whose name escapes me at the moment. But again, this type of like consistent presence in the public space without being overtly political, but that can be connected to those who want to some politics, if you know, whichever politics that may be.
But I just wanted to put the Taylor Swift example as a non-scientific way to say that I'm a little bit skeptical about influencers as a true democratic change agent. I think they are more convenient to get around platform policy. And I will just end this gift by saying that reading about the influencers being brought to the White House, the White House Office of Digital Strategy also commented on Joe Biden liking being on podcasts.
Oh,
I don't know if he actually likes it or not, but
he's on trend.
But they say this is funny. Podcasts really suit this president in particular. He is not a short form kind of guy. He's loquacious and really enjoys connecting one-to-one with a person. Or I would say it helps to have long space to discuss where you're not necessarily visually present.
Joe Biden on Social Media and Politics podcast. This is what we want to go for.
No, he's old. He likes broadcasting from the basement, to use the old.
Come on. He's
Trump
old
trope.
but experimental.
But it's funny. Biden, him and podcast gel. And I think actually he'll be on a few big ones. So look out for that in 2024.
Look out for any pod, right? I think podcasts are still very much trending in a great format to deliver stuff. But let me go to my final gift.
Yes.
Since this year we're a bit, limited. We only have two. And my second gift is kind of connected to my first and is based on the EU concern for something that can be called together as disinformation and cybersecurity. I was mentioning in my earlier intervention that two important legislations, the Data Services Act and the AI Act, have been passed. But besides those very important and referential rules, we have some two interesting things coming up from the EU as well. One is the Defense of Democracy recommendation package, and the other one, which is not yet approved, please note, but it's something that will happen very early in 2024, is the Transparency and Targeting of Political Advertising Act. So there are two things that speak about this worry that is very much of a concern to the European lawmakers about the potential of digital communication very much to undermine democracy. And this is based also, or they're basically backed by public opinion. A Eurobarometer, like a poll of all Europeans, for those who are not familiar with this instrument, that was published at the end of December, at the beginning, of December, basically presented this kind of grim, worrying picture. And I'm going to cite some of these results because it's always interesting to see kind of the perceptions of regular citizens. Europeans fear lots about the upcoming European Parliament elections, May 2024. They are afraid that people will base their voting decision on disinformation, and that is a 78% of the people asked, and that's a statistically reliable data. Another fear, equally large, is elections being manipulated through cyber attacks. That's 72%. Foreign countries influencing elections covertly, 70%, and people being pressured into voting in a particular way, 65%. 9 in 10 respondents saw civil society as an important element in promoting and protecting democracy and common values. There you go. Those are the Eurobarometer's numbers.
Yep, but I would be very careful about interpreting those. And we talked about this in an episode this year on the podcast with Adam Kovacevic, which was when you ask people, are you concerned about this? They are going to mark yes. So there's a priming effect in the instrument, which is, he was making the argument about paper clips. Are you concerned about the paper clip shortage in the US? Then people are going to say, yes, of course, what paper should, but yeah. So that's one potential confound. And the second is the third person effect, which we've also talked about this year on the podcast, which is, I think when people are asked, is disinformation a problem? They're definitely going to check yes. And the interesting part is that there's this third person effect where people think disinformation is a problem for everyone else, but not for them. So there's this collective...
This is not specified, by the way, in the barometer, but it could very well be the case.
I'm just pointing to a methodological and
theoretical questions of measuring
reason for these things as only a clarification.
The European Commission takes these numbers, though, as at the outset of its legislation on what they call the Defense of Democracy package.
It's not
and this
evidence-based.
follows on something that they had previously in place called the Code of Practice on Disinformation, which basically is a conference, if you wish, or collaboration between European-level politicians and online platforms and other signatories, including Facebook, X, and Snapchat and TikTok, and probably some others that are not listed, to address the harmful potential of new, again, AI-powered tools when it comes to disinformation. So the emphasis in several of these legislative pieces that are coming up or have been already approved is on, again, reining in platforms and countering a perceived high-level, though, threat from cyber attacks and disinformation. And in terms of cyber attacks, I wanted also to quote or to put the numbers, since maybe some podcast listeners may find it easy to understand why is this an important thing. At the meeting of economic leaders in Davos in 2023, earlier this year, and I think it was in the February, March, there was an estimation that cyber attacks altogether, from an economic point of view, could cost the global economy almost $24 trillion by 2027. Many examples of cyber attacks directed against companies or economies, but that could also be reversed into politics. And with the Russia-Ukraine conflict being very active, a hot conflict in Europe, I think this is what feeds those high numbers that you picked up on. So they might be reflecting a certain bias in the construction of the questions. I do not know the questions, I haven't checked, but it might also reflect the context in which we find ourselves, which is a high-level perceived threat context, because Europeans see both the Israel-Hamas contest and the Russia-Ukraine war as relating to themselves and potentially threatening their own democracy, basically, which is what the European Union picks up on.
I would just say, despite the too much criticism on that particular survey question on disinformation, I think when you compare disinformation and the risk of cyber attacks is much more concrete. You know, having a piece of a deep fake rolling around on the internet, you know, bad for the information environment, probably not super persuasive. You have a campaign or politician, even worse, they get hacked. They can snowball that attack very simply, because once you essentially do a spear phishing attack to get the password of that account, then that politician can initiate spear phishing through their, you know, they can message someone to their network, and that can snowball very quickly, and that can definitely sink a stock market or have serious implications. Which
is probably the reason why that number is so much, by order of trillions.
Yeah, but just saying, to put cyber attacks and disinformation on the same footing is a bit, it's a false equivalence.
The group, no time now to go into the details what they mean by various things, but basically they think cyber attack is connected to cybersecurity, and cybersecurity is connected connected to the election process. So the concern of the European Union, and the reason why this comes up now, is because of the upcoming elections and the way they justify this particular defense of democracy package being voted through is because they really want to make sure that the upcoming European elections are going to be free, or as much as possible free, from any foreign interference and from preserving the infrastructure of elections in a way that is devoid of risks from of interference. And some of the concerns may resonate to something that has been discussed quite a lot in the 2016 American presidential elections, which is third countries funding political parties, political foundations, campaign organizations, and candidates. Yeah, so this is the thing that they see as a weak link in their overarching European election system, which is more complex than the American one, let it be noted. And I think this is what they want to emphasize through this ruling. And just to also bring up in this context, the 2024 scheduled discussion between the Council of the EU and the Parliament and the Commission, the discussion around allowing micro-targeting, basically, in common parlance. There is a strong support and alignment between the Parliament and the national governments of European member states to not allow basically micro-targeting of political actors. So the political ads should be done in such a way that citizens would recognize them as political ads, that they should understand who is behind them and know whether they have received a targeted advertisement as citizens. So they should be very clearly marked, including the fact that an AI has decided that they should see this particular category of content.
Great, whatever. I think it's a huge overstatement of the effects. It looks like everyone's doing something. I'm being critical because the positive value of this is that instead of spending money on digital ads that may not work, maybe because there's different rules per country, but there's a certain limited number of resources that parties can have for communication and outreach and just spending in general, right? They're capped. Maybe that money is better spent than social media ads and the work around creating them. That could be a positive democratic potential, but I think this is a lot of addressing the public's concerns, looking like we're doing stuff, but in the end, this is whether you ban micro-targeting or not from the EU, it's not going to drastically shape the future of the European Parliament. That's my critical claim.
Perhaps, and we know also there's research ongoing about the perception of micro-targeting from a citizen's point of view, and we see that citizens sometimes are critical of being specifically targeted. Sometimes they do not care. Sometimes they welcome this because they find, okay, this is the right political entity that I should know about, and actually knowing about this agenda is giving me that kind of information that motivates me to vote, which otherwise probably would not necessarily be the case. So it's a double-edged sword. I just wanted to highlight the importance that is given on disinformation and cyber attacks in the general social media spheres, and the collaboration between the European authorities and the online platforms of Facebook, X, Snapchat, and TikTok in particular, that there is a dialogue, that is an ongoing dialogue between the companies and this kind of supranational government. And this has translated, for example, in the urging that the European authorities have given to rein in disinformation campaign, in particular in connection with Russia-Ukraine conflict, but also to probably the most polarizing content, which is Israel-Hamas. So I think this is where, Europeans are as always more careful. The precautionary principle is in action, and they see this as something that may explode the stability of the discussion and political discussion, political campaigning for the European Union elections. And I think they want to prevent that. They don't want the European elections to be decided by a specific contextual external factor to the EU.
Yeah, no, I get it. I don't think it would, but
it's basically they judge the mobilization level and they simply express a concern.
Yeah, but I do. Again, I know I'm being overly harsh and kind of too critical, but I do think let's just play through worst case scenario on disinformation. And worst case scenario on cyberattacks. Worst case scenario on cyberattacks is devastating. Everyone, snowball account.
No digital services.
Snowball attacks. Like there's like real harm there. Worst case scenario disinformation is, you have some coordinated disinformation campaign. A lot of people's opinion switches. How much can that actually change the configuration of the parliament, the laws that are passed? I think it's too big of a leap. So I would encourage people who have made it this far in the podcast, who disagree and have a very qualified argument for why disinformation is not overstated, to come on the podcast and talk about it. Because I don't think the attention matches the risk. But I could be wrong, and I totally get that where it's really problematic is in instances like war.
Yeah.
And we're currently experiencing two, but these are also quite large outliers at the general level.
I do think this is context-based. That particular legislative focus is context-based, but that reflects to some extent the Europeans' general concern. They find these conflicts very close to home, perhaps in contrast to the American public that from our conversations before and from other readings, we find the Americans to be more distant to these type of ongoing conflicts than their European counterpart.
Yeah, we'll see. With 2024, the American elections happen every 4 years, and the European elections happen every 5 years. Yeah. So just the way things work out, it's going to be quite a special event to have both occurring in the same year.
Super election year, right? I think it bears saying that the year in review 2024, at the end of that year, we'll really have some hard data to put on this kind of fingertop feelings that we currently discussed with these elections and these ongoing crises potentially edging towards a solution.
Yeah, lots of unknowns. It'll be if 2023 was a year of AI and creator economy consolidation and challenge, I think 2024 will be. We should be on our toes.
I think so as well.
It could also be just two elections with marginally predictable outcomes as well, but we'll see.
We'll see indeed. So that's like a cliffhanger for next year's edition of this particular episode of the podcast.
Yeah, I think two short gifts, but still substantial amount of time. So thank you to the listeners who have stuck with us, not only through this podcast, but also through this year. And with that, I will just say Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And I think the first episode for the pod will be out January 17th, if all goes according to plan. So, for Dr. Anamaria Dutceac Segesten, I'm Michael Becerra, and see you next year.